are independent. What does it mean? It means that they are not correlated or they do not have any correlation. So then we can write the same equation as E of A dot B equal to, I'm sorry, yeah, equal to E of A dot E of B. It means we are multiplying expected value of A by expected value of B. Hence, we can also write the equation for covariance like this. That is E of A multiplied by E of B minus A bar and B bar. So this equation we have used here. Okay, so E of A into E of B. So this is E of A, this is E of B. So we are multiplying 2 into 5 plus 3 into 8 and so on. Minus it is A bar and B bar. Okay. So let us continue. So next is data reduction strategies. So here we try to reduce our data. Data means it could be the size of entire data set, or maybe we want to reduce some of the columns that are present in our database. Okay, it can be anything. So why is that we need to go for this kind of data reduction? We know that our data is stored in database or else data warehouse, and because we are saying we are using the data for data mining and it is a years together of data, it could be in terms of terabytes. Okay, so and we need to, because the data itself is very large, whatever the analysis that we are trying to do on the data is also a complex analysis and which is going to take much amount of time if the data is very huge like this. That's the reason we try to reduce the data. Now, does that mean that we reduce the data and we are compromising on something? No, not at all. Okay, so whatever the output or the analysis we are doing or whatever the output that we are expecting, okay, the same output we should also get after using the reduced data set also. So we are not compromising on the quality or the expected output. At the same time, whenever it is possible to reduce the data without affecting the expected things, we try to do it. So what are the strategies to do this? So first one is what is called as dimensionality reduction. There are many dimensions. There could be 100 dimensions. Sometimes it may be some around 1000 dimensions could be there.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, we are not able to see the data reduction slide. We are seeing the covariance slide.
Not able to see.
Ma'am, we are seeing the covariance slide, not the data reduction one.
Nobody is able to see. Is it
Ma'am,
only
I can see
Rashi?
the data reduction slide only.
Which one?
The data reduction slide.
You are able to see?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Then maybe it could be a network problem at your end, Rashi. If nobody is able to see, then it may be my problem. But if some of you are able to see the data reduction slide and some of you are not able to see, it may be a lag due to your network latency. Maybe you just wait for some more seconds or minutes. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am.
Or maybe you can just log out and again try to log in. Yeah. So
Yes.
this dimensionality reduction, we try to reduce the dimensions or the attributes or the columns here. So the various techniques are listed here. So wavelet transformation and principal component analysis. So these two we are not covering in detail here. Maybe in future, if you opt for your, machine learning as elective, there you might study this. It is not a part of our DWDM. So we would be studying one of the techniques. It is feature subset selection under dimensionality reduction. Then another strategy could be what is called as numerosity reduction. Here we are not concentrating on reducing our dimensions or the attributes. Rather, we try to see to reduce the data itself. Can we represent our data in some format so that the reduced format represents entire data set? Okay, so for under that the various methods are regression and log linear models. So regression again we are discussing during the classification chapter, so we are not dealing in detail here, but quickly I'll tell you regression means, right, suppose if you have two-dimensional points, okay, so it's possible for us to fit all those points using a straight line, right, y equal to mx plus c. So it means that, so instead of representing my hundreds of data points in a 2D, I can simply represent it as y equal to mx plus c provided I have all those values. Okay. Similarly, next is histograms and then clustering and then sampling. So clustering, for example, we are grouping similar data together or one particular cluster. Then what happens? So there is some cluster centroid or center point or some data which is representing a particular cluster. So instead of retaining all the points or all the data that are there in one cluster, we can use only one representation of that cluster. So that's how we try to reduce our data. Say for another example could be, say there is a class of, say if section A and B combined together, it may be around 150 or 160. So if I want to communicate something, instead of communicating to individual student, there is one person called as a class representative, a CR. So if I communicate something to a CR, in turn CR is going to communicate to you, all right. So for a CR is a representative. He is representing a entire class. Okay, so instead of having the details or the email IDs or contact details of all 160, it is enough if I have only one person's contact number and then the email ID. Okay, so from 160 I'm able to reduce to 1. Purpose is what? I want to share something. So if I share to one person, it is shared to others. So my purpose is served, my job is done, then why I need to have more details with me? So I can have reduced or whatever is the required amount of data, only that particular data we can try to retain. So that is the idea. And then data cube aggregation. So the last one is data compression. So here we are not trying to remove anything or eliminate anything directly as we do in the dimensional reduction or the numerical reduction data. So data compression, overall data itself we try to compress, we try to store in some other different format by using certain techniques. So there are the various data reduction strategies. So because the data is very huge, we say it is called as sometimes curse of dimensionality. Okay, we start with the first one, that is dimensionality reduction. So why do we say it is a curse? Because as the dimension of a given data set increases, the data becomes increasingly sparse. Suppose if I have a database or data set pertaining to some domain or some specific area or some task, and if the dimension keeps on increasing, so every tuple or every record might not have the value for all those dimensions or columns or attributes, so which results in a sparse data. Okay, then the density, suppose if I try to cluster or group data based on some density means the data points that are together in a particular area, the density is more, so I may consider it as a cluster. Now because of the sparsity which is there due to more number of dimension, it might affect my clustering also. And using this sparse data, if I try to cluster based on the density or the distance, then the clusters what I get might not be a meaningful one. And one more thing is the subspace. So in certain techniques we use this subspace, and because it's a large space we try to group into subspace as partitions, and the number of subspace also keeps on increases. So there are the problems with the dimension whenever it keeps on increasing. Hence it is required or it is essential to reduce the dimension. So why we are doing this? To avoid this curse of dimensionality. Then it also helps to eliminate the features which are not relevant for a particular given task. As I told you in the previous class, all the attributes are not required for all the tasks. So whatever the task we are having with us, only the data relevant which is useful for that analysis or that task, only that data we can try to have with us. So irrelevant features we are trying to remove, and sometimes if there are some noise or outliers, that can also be removed. So in turn, because once your dimension gets reduces, automatically the time taken or the time required to do the analysis or the space required to store our data drastically reduces. And because of this, if we try to represent or if we try to visualize our data, it becomes very easy for us to visualize. So as I told you, one of the method is what is called as attribute subset selection. Why subset? Because we may not require all the attributes, or sometimes all the attributes might not be relevant. So whatever is the reason, we try to move with a reduced set of attributes for our analysis purpose. So to begin with, it is redundant attributes. Suppose if the same attribute is occurring again and again, or the same information is there in more than one place, in a, sometimes maybe a directly, sometimes it could be in a indirect way. In that case, we can try to remove those redundant attributes. So what is it? It is a duplicate information which is there in one or more attribute. So for example, if I say purchase price of a product, suppose if this price, if it includes all the taxes like GST or whatever the other taxes which is applicable, if price includes all the taxes, then why is that we are separately again maintaining the attribute sales tax paid? Because we have the information price, and if it is sales tax paid, and if this price consists of all these various taxes, then it can be considered as a redundant information, and we can only retain only one of the attributes. That's how we can try to reduce the attributes. So this is about the redundant. Sometimes what happens is it might not be a redundant or duplicate one, but it might not be a relevant one. So irrelevant attributes or the dimensions need to be eliminated. So how do you know it is irrelevant? It is something which is not having any useful information for whatever the task we are trying to do. For example, if I want to see or predict a GPA of student, then email ID is irrelevant, right? It may not contribute anything to me. What I require to calculate GPA may be the various scores scored in various courses or subjects, or maybe previous GPAs I can take into consideration, and maybe I can try to predict it. So for that I may not require the email ID or permanent address or the contact number or date of birth. Such kinds of information I may not require for this particular task. So for this task what I do, I'll remove all those attributes which are irrelevant. Please remember that removing means we are not deleting it permanently. We do require that data only pertaining to this particular task, whatever we are trying to do. So for that task, what are the attributes we require or we need? Only those we are considering. That's what is the meaning of this. Irrelevant attributes we are not considering. However, they will be there with our data. Suppose if you consider the example of I want to classify customers who are going to purchase popular new CD. So if I want to classify the customers who are more likely to purchase a new CD which is popular, then what are the attributes or the dimensions I require? So I might require the age of a person, right? Age also matters. Then the music taste, different persons like different kinds of music. So if I know what is the type or the kind of the music that is available in new CD, accordingly I can select this one. Okay, but what about the telephone number, which is not required? Okay, so with respect to this example, I may require age, music taste or other related details, but not these kind of details. So basically the aim of this attribute subset selection is we try to select those attributes, a set of attributes which are minimal. Whatever the analysis we require, we try to do that analysis with the least possible set of attribute. Then probability distribution of the data classes is as close as to the original distribution. That's what I told you. After removing this, we are not compromising with our actual data or data distribution, and it should not affect our final end result or our outcome. In such a way, we try to reduce the attributes. So what are the advantage of this attribute reduction is it reduces the number of attributes appearing in the discovered patterns, and which in turn helps to make the patterns easy to understand. Imagine I have 1000 attributes and I'm keeping all those 1000 attributes and trying to analyze and give some pattern to you. Or if I'm able to reduce those thousands into say some 100, so naturally it becomes easy for me to understand the pattern which is having less number of attributes. So what are the ways to do this? Suppose if I consider that the number of attributes are n in general, and if I say I want a subset, so how many subsets possible? It could be 2 power n, right? I have n attributes and I need to look into all possible subsets because we have 2 power n subsets. So one way is exhaustive search. I need to compute all possible 2 power n subsets, and I need to look into each of the 2 power n and then select one of the subset, a few of the subsets. But which is not recommended. Exhaustive search is going to take more amount of time. Other one could be heuristic method. That is, we use some kind of the greedy method. So greedy, as you are aware, it tries to achieve the local optima and with the hope of achieving the global optima, but global optimal is not guaranteed always. So one of the heuristic method is stepwise forward selection. So we start by selecting one of the feature that is best suitable or that is very much required. We start with one such attribute, and then in each step we go on adding other attributes related to that attribute and which are required for our analysis. So for example, some general examples are given here. Suppose if we are having some 6 attributes A1 to A6. So to begin with, it is empty because it's a method is stepwise forward selection. As we move forward, we keep on adding more number of attributes into our sets. So beginning it would be empty or null. Then we have 6 attributes, right? A1 to A6. Suppose if I know that A1 is the best attribute which is required. So first step, I'm going to add the attribute A1 into my subset. Then second step, what I do is, now after adding A1, I'm left with the attributes A2, A3, A4, A5 and A6. So out of these 5, I need to find out a suitable attribute. Okay, so I find suppose A4 to be an important which is required. Then second step, along with A1, I'm going to add one more attribute A4. So after A4, now I'm left with 4 attributes A2, A3, A5 and A6. And if I know that A6 is required, I'll take A6 and then I'm left with A2, A3, A5, and if I feel that okay, A1, 4 and 6 are enough for my analysis and I don't require other three, then I can stop here, and this is what my reduced attribute set, and I'll continue my analysis with this reduced set. The other method is stepwise backward elimination. Okay, previous one was forward, it is backward. So what do we do here? Earlier we started with the empty set. Because it's a backward, to begin with, we start with all the attributes, and then every step we try to identify the attribute which is not at all required or which is irrelevant, and we are trying to remove that attribute. Again, if the same example, we have A1 to A6. So here you can see in the second step, A2 has been removed. So out of 6, I may come to know that A2 is highly irrelevant for the task given. So I remove that A2. Then further in the third step, which one is removed? So first we removed A2, second step, then we remove the attribute A3. So we are left with now A1, 4, 5 and 6. And the next step we remove this A5 and we are left with A1, A4 and A6. And these are the reduced attribute set. So one is the forward selection, other one is backward elimination. The other possibility is combination of both. That is, in each step, we try to select the best attribute and remove the worst from the remaining attributes. For example, here A1 to A6, what we can do is, I might select A1 because it is required for me, and I am removing say some A2 and A5, something like that. Okay, so we try to combine both. That could be another strategy. So this is about the attribute reduction or dimensionality reduction. One more technique could be decision tree induction. Again, in the classification chapter, we will be looking into this detail, how to construct this tree. So here, just an example. In the decision tree induction, what we do is, so we have so many attributes. We select one of the best possible attributes as our root node. So how do I know this is A4 is the best attribute? There various measures are there, like information gain or entropy, Gini index and so on. So based on any of the statistical measures, it is possible for us to find out a node. So here, for example, A4 could be our root node. Then we may be having some attributes or some values or some conditions which we are checking here. If the condition is true, we follow this path. If the condition is false or no, we follow this particular path. So again here we select, if we follow this path, what could be the next best attribute? So it may be A1. Similarly, if you follow this path, the next attribute could be A6. So like this, we try to construct a tree. So finally, what happens is we would be left with the leaf nodes. The squares and the rectangles are the intermediate nodes, whereas the leaf nodes are represented using the elliptical curve. So here we have two classes, class 1, class 2. They are our leaf nodes. So we are able to get our reduced set because we have only two classes, A1, A2, and based on this, what are the attributes that we have considered to construct this tree is A1, A4 and A6. So this is our reduced attribute set. Is this clear? Any doubts? Any doubts here? So what we do is we try to construct a decision tree. When the entire tree is constructed, we look into the nodes. So what are the attributes that have been considered for generating the decision tree? So only those attributes we consider at the end, and then we use them as our reduced set of attributes. So that's about dimensionality reduction. The next one is data reduction. So another method is histogram. So what is the use of histogram is? It is used to partition the data into disjoint subsets, or it's also called as buckets. Suppose we have only a single attribute, then each bucket represents a frequency of that attribute. How many times that attribute or that value is occurring. So that is called as the singleton buckets, because we have single attributes and the histogram represents or gives the information regarding the frequency. So frequency histograms, univariate graphical method, because if you say it is a singleton, it could be only one variable anyway. So it consists of set of rectangles. You can see one of the examples, right? So these are all the rectangle representation. So consist of set of rectangles that reflect the counts or frequencies of the classes. If the data is categorical, sometimes it is also called as the bar chart. Otherwise, it is called as histogram. So let us see this example. So price of various items have been given here and they are all ordered, ascending order. So you can see that there is a value 1 which is occurring twice. So 2 times the value 1 is there in our data. So here you can see the first one, it represents 1, and you can see here the frequency is 2. Similarly, the next one is the data 5 and the frequency of 5 is 5. Then we have the data 8, frequency is 2. You can see here 8 occurs 2 times, then 10 occurs 4 times. You can see here this is a 10. So like this, each and every unique value price in this case we represent using the x-axis, and the y-axis gives us the count or the frequency, and each of them we also call it as the bucket. So each bucket represents one particular value, that is value whatever the price and its frequency. So bucket represents a pair. For example, here the value is 8 and its frequency is 2. So another example, it's called as the equal width histogram. It's again a same database. There we are representing using the singleton for every value we represented. So what we are trying to do is, for histogram, the width we are trying to have uniform width for all. So here we can see it is 1 to 10, then 11 to 20, 21 to 30. So what are the values between 1 to 10? How many times they are going to occur? So here it tells us the frequency of all the price which lies between the value 1 and 10. Similarly, this represents the frequency of all the prices which lies between 11 and 20. So you can see here the x-axis, the width or the range of each bucket is same. Hence it is called as equal width histogram. The data what we are used is same. If I go back, you can see these are the prices. So here it is singleton bucket. We are representing using singleton. So every value we are giving its respective frequency. Suppose sometime we were not interested in single value or the number of values are more, then we may select this particular other kinds of histogram. For example, this is equal width histogram. Again, just one more example. Some data is the class interval. If it is 0 to 5, we can see what is the frequency. So here frequency is 4. So next one is the value between 5 to 10 and the frequency is 10. So you can see the data and just look at this histogram. So by looking into histogram immediately, because it's a visualization tool, immediately it is possible for us to understand what is the information which is there in the data. In this case, it's a frequency or the count information. So what are the values and what are their frequencies? Immediately we will come to know using this histogram. So any doubts?
No, ma'am.
No? Okay. So if no doubts, try to answer these questions. So here I have given you one histogram. Height, distribution of 30 people. So first question is, how many people have heights between 159.5 and 169.5 centimeter? Looking into histogram, is it possible for you to answer this question? You can note down this histogram in your notes if you want. So whenever there are problems, I'll give you some time for you to note down in your notebook. If you want, you can note down in your book so that you can refer it to later. You can unmute yourself and give me the answer, or you can use your chat window also to give the answer. Abhigyan, it is saying 7. That is for the first one, right? Yeah, how many people have height between 159.5 to 16? So you can see here in the third one, right? It is given as 159.5. Here it is 169.5. And if you look into the frequency, it is 7. Yeah, good. Okay, next question. How many people have heights less than 159.5? 15. Yeah, how do you get that 15? You can add the previous ones, isn't it? So here you say which were less than 159.5. So we need to see these two frequencies and you can just simply add them. You are going to get the answer. Yes. Then Aditya has given the answer. Okay. Third one is, how many people have heights more than 169.5 centimeter? Is 8. Okay, the last one is, what percent of people have heights between 149.5 and 179.5 centimeter? Yeah. Okay, so given the answer, you can see first one is 7, second one is 15, then the third I also given the split up how I'm getting this answer. Okay, so totally we are, for the last question, if you look into, totally we have the data pertaining to 30 people and the question says that height between 149.5 and 179.5 centimeters. So you add all those frequency values and divide by 30, you'll be getting your answer as 70%. Okay, so I got quite a few answers. Good. Okay, then let me continue. Just example, distribution of grades, right? Once when the result comes and we use all those grades as the students and we plot as a histogram, immediately we can see, right, how many students have got A, how many students are able to secure grade D, C, D, and so on. Otherwise, what happens if we are not visualizing this, then we need to count it manually, looking into columns, how many students have scored A, right? Or maybe Excel sheet if you are using. Then you need to have some kind of formula at the end, say something like equal to count if, right? Some cell range, some, say if it is in the column D, we can say some D22 or D160, which is equal to A. It gives me the count of all the tuples with a grade A. So here instead of that, we are just simply using the histograms. So how is it we can relate this to data reduction? We can see that instead of representing, say in the all the 30 people one by one, visualization, it won't require or occupy much space. Okay, then a little bit more about this binning. So as told you, it could be equal width binning or equal depth binning. Equal depth, as I think I told in the previous class. Okay, each of the bins would be having n number of items or the data in their respective bins or buckets. Then equal width. So how we can form or construct this equal width binning? So the first step is we need to see the n. What is the number of bins that is given to us or that is available? Okay. So if we know the n, then you need to find out the lowest and the highest values. You can note down this formula if you want. Suppose if I consider A and B as the lowest and highest. So given a data, A represents the lowest value in my data and B represents the highest value in my data for a given attribute. And I know how many number of data are available, that gives me my n. So the difference between highest and lowest, that is B minus A divided by n, gives me the width or the interval for my bin. Okay. So once I get this quantity W, I can use this to find the width. So first bin, the width is minimum plus W. It means that is the range. We start with the minimum value. So how many values we can have in that bin is up to this min plus W. So second bin, it is min plus 2 times the W and so on. Suppose if the number of bins are K, then it is min plus K minus 1 into W. Okay. So this is how it is possible for us to construct a equal width partitioning given a n data item. As you can see, it's very straightforward because you need to know the lowest and the highest value and the n, and you can get the value of W or the width, and once you have this width, it is easy for us to go for this equal width binning. But the problem is the outliers may dominate. Outliers means what? We cannot know what are the outliers. Suppose if I have say some continuous data, say some 1 2 3 3 3 3 4 something like that up to 20, if I have any data, and let me say that one of the data is say some 40. So I have all the data which is lying between 1 to 20, and only one or two data say maybe some 38 and 40. Okay. Now how do I find the width? In this case, highest is my 40, right? And lowest is 1. So 40 minus 1, it gives me 39 and divided by number of data. So because I'm calculating the width based on the lowest and the highest, suppose if at all some outliers are there or the noise are there in our data, they would be usually lying at the lower end or at the far end, right? But we are considering those values itself to determine our width, and hence it is a problem if there is some outliers in the data. And suppose if the data is skewed, then this equal width might not represent our data in a proper or the required manner. So it all depends upon the data and its distribution whenever we need to select the type of binning. So let us take this as example. So 12 sales price have been given here. So first thing is we need to know in binning, any binning equi-frequency or equi-width, whatever is the binning you are asked to write, you need to sort the data first. Okay, here it is already in the sorted order, it's fine. In case if it is not in the sorted order, the first step in binning is always to sort the data in ascending order and then see whether you want to go for equal frequency partition or equal width partitioning, and then accordingly do it. So I'll give you 2 minutes. So try to solve this problem. I'll give the answer later in case if you don't get this. Hope you noted down the equation for width, right? W equal to B minus A divided by N, where A and B are lowest and the highest values, and N is total number of data. Yeah, done. Yeah. So equal frequency, you can see we have 12 values and 3 bins are there. So it means the each bin would be having 4 values. Alok has given the answer. Okay. So, okay. Then Yateen has given the probably the range or the width. Okay. Yeah. So equal width. The highest value what we have is 215 and the lowest is how much it is 5. Okay. So the difference between 215 and 5 is 210 divided by 3 will get the value as 70. So now the minimum value is 5. So W is 70, right? So minimum plus W. It means 5 plus 70 is 75. So 75 is the maximum value that can be put in a first bin. So starting with the 5, we can add all the values up to 72 in the first bin, right? The second bin is, it says min plus 2W. So 2W means it is 70 into 2, that is 140. So 140 plus min is 5 becomes 145. So after 72, whatever the data is there less than 145, all those data goes into our second bin. So here in this example, we have only one data satisfying this constraint and that is 92. Hence 92 is there in second bin. Then similarly W plus 3W, min plus 3W gives us the range for the third bin and we can have 204 and 215 in the third bin. So this is how we can see here the data, right? We don't have same amount of data in each bin, but its width remains the same. So what is the advantage of this equal width? Suppose let us say we get to know have some more new values. So as and when we have the new values, we can easily add them into these bins because already we know the boundaries of each bin and those values could be easily added. So this is the first one is frequency, second one is the width. So this is equal frequency means each bin would be having equal or the same amount of data, whereas the equal width is the width of each bin remains the same and not the data items. So exercise you can do it later. You can just note down this question. So majority of the time, usually the mistake what students do is they don't sort the data. Okay, you need to see the complete data, then sort the data and then start with equal frequency and equal with binning. For example, here the beginning you see 0, 4, 12. Okay, you'll assume that okay it is already started and you start no. But you observe carefully, you can see that after 12 we have 16, then 15 and then 18. So it means it is not sorted completely. Right? So you need to observe the given input completely first. So spend some time to read the question, to understand the question, and then start writing your answer. If you hurry up, if you don't read the question correctly, or if you don't spend the time to look into the problem, then though you know the answer, though you know the method, you might end up in losing your marks. Note it down. So it is 0, 4, 12, 16, 15, 18, 24, 26 and 28. Okay. So the next method for data reduction is clustering. Again, we have a dedicated chapter for clustering, but here we will just look into how it can be used for a data reduction. So clustering, what we are doing, given large amount of data, we are trying to group it based on the similarity. So more the similar the objects are, they belong to one single cluster or one single group. So we would be having a centroid If it is a Euclidean distance, we will be having some central point, or if it is object based, we will be having one of the object which represents our cluster. So we would be having something which represents the entire cluster, and we would be retaining only that object or that data instead of having entire or all the data set. That's how clustering can be a method for data reduction. And of course, it is effective if the data is clustered, or if there is some kind of similarities more, or they are well similar to each other, then it is useful. Suppose if the data is not spread across uniformly, if it is smeared, and if we use this as the technique to reduce our data, in that case it might not help us much. Then one more method is what is called as sampling. So sampling means, you know, right, we take only some sample data instead of taking entire data. So the total number of data in our data set is n, and we try to get only some sample, and we call it as the S. So S is a sample which represents the whole data set, that is n. So what is the use of this is, the cost of getting this sample is proportional to the size of the sample S as opposed to N, right? Because if I consider the entire data, N is very huge. Whereas if I am taking S sample, means it will be much less than the N. Hence it is reduced, and we have all the advantage if we are going to reduce our data. It allows a mining algorithm to run in complexity that is potentially sublinear to the size of the data. So there are certain algorithms whose complexity increases depending upon the size of data. So more the data we have, more the time the algorithm will take to give us the result or the answer. So in such kinds of algorithm, if we try to get the reduced or only the sample data set, then it is advantage to us. Of course, it depends how we are going to take this sample, what is the method that we are using for this sampling, it depends upon that. The sampling method itself is not proper, then after sampling, reducing the data, we try to analyze the data, again the result might not be a correct one. So need to look into the method what we are using for sampling. So basically there are 4 methods that we would be discussing here. So you can see here, first one is SRSWOR. It means simple random sample without replacement. Okay, SRSWOR, I repeat, simple random sample without replacement. Of size, yes, given n, we try to get random samples of size s, where s is less than n. We have a data d and with n number of tuple, so we try to draw only s number of tuple which is less than n, because the purpose is to reduce the data. So what is the meaning of this? Simple random sample without replacement. So to begin with, because we say it's a random, so probability of drawing of any data from the original set is 1 by n, right? There is a one probability. I can get any data because I'm not using any equations or any intuitions, nothing. Directly, because it's a random, I can pick any of the data. So each of the data is having equal probability of picking it to be considering the data into our sample data set. Then the next one is simple random sample with replacement. So here O is not there, it means it is with replacement. It's similar to the first one, but the difference is whenever you draw a sample from D, that sample is recorded in the sample data and then again it is replaced. It means once you pick a data as a sample, you are placing it back into your, it means that there is a possibility that the same data or the same object could be selected multiple number of times in our sample data. Okay, here it is without replacement. Suppose if I say that I have data say A, B, C, D, E, and if I pick D, then I am left with only A, B, C, E because I am not replacing, without replacing. Once I pick D, it is done. I don't keep the D back into my data. Whereas the second method is if I pick the D from my data A, B, C, D, E, again I'll put back the D. So for next step also I have the same data A, B, C, D, E. And because we are randomly picking up the probabilities 1 by n for all the data, it might so happen that again I might pick D only. That is about the second one. Then the third one is cluster sample. We have the cluster similar items, we are grouping them together because clusters are disjoint data sets, and we consider few of the clusters and not all the cluster. We have m number of cluster, we take randomly few clusters. Then what happens in case of cluster is because we are randomly taking into few clusters, yes, and not m, and clusters are disjoint data set. So some of the data we might ignore. They may not be present in our sample at all and it might affect our result. So the better one would be stratified sample. It ensures that we have at least one data from each of the groups or each of the clusters. So let us look into more detail with the diagrammatic view so that you are able to understand in a better way. Okay, so here we have the data. Okay, this is my original raw data. So first one is, you can see here, simple random sample without replacement. So first if I pick up this one into my sample, this will not be there in my raw data. So you can see all the samples are unique here. Okay, whereas here simple random sampling with replacement. So if I pick this data into my sample, again I replace it, again I put back it here. Okay, I am not removing it from raw data. So next time it might again come here. So in that way here samples are not unique, whereas in this method we are going to get the unique sample. So it depends upon with or without replacement. So if we say without replacement, then they would be unique. If it is with replacement, they may not be unique. Of course, they may be unique, but we don't know. Okay, sometimes there is a possibility of the same data object being present in that sample. So in which case will SRSWR be useful? Okay, Nikesh, yeah. Again, as I told you, whatever the technique we talk, it all depends upon the kind of data we have and the task that is there in our hand. Suppose we want to see that we want only all the unique values, we don't want to have the redundant values. In that case, we need to select the without replacement. And sometimes we say that the same case is there which is present multiple amount of time. In that case maybe we can go for the with replacement. So it all depends upon the task that is there in our hand. So same thing in a represent in a different way. So we have around 8 transactions. There are the different tuples of the records, and without replacement you can see there are unique, and here maybe one or T4 is being repeated twice. This is about the cluster. You can see T1 to T100, it is in one cluster, then 101 to 200 second cluster, third and fourth, and so on. So we are having groups of transactions which are similar to each other. So from these, we are, suppose if I say that I want to sample size is 2, I'll take only 2 clusters. Maybe I take the second cluster from 201 to 300, and maybe some other in between 701 to 800. Okay, so we are drawing 2 clusters. Instead of drawing all the 10 clusters, we are removing or extracting 2 clusters. Then if you want to ensure, as I told you, you would like to have minimum one representation from each. For example, here you can see people are grouped based on their age. So youth, then middle age, and then the senior. So you want to do some analysis and you would like to have at least one representation from each of the group. Okay. So for example, let us say that we want to do some say some event or some activity, and there is a circular, and we may say interested students may participate, and we are doing many events, not only a single event. Okay, so this can also be answer for Nikesh question. So a same student might be interested in more than one event, right? So we don't restrict the student. Okay, you can, if I am having n event, I am allowing Nikesh to participate in all the n events. So it is with replacement. Suppose if I say that, okay, I want to give chance for all the students, I want to ensure that all the each student should participate in at least one of the event, and that is my intention, to ensure the participation of each student at least once. In that case, maybe I may go for without replacement, isn't it? Or let us say you can also take the example of your placements. If you go to placements, if you get placement in some company, and they may ask you in the beginning what is your dream company, right? And then the moment you get placed into one of the companies, and other companies, though you are eligible, they may not allow you to sit in the other companies. They may allow you to sit only for the dream company, not for the other company. Why? Because one person, if is eligible, he may secure job in multiple companies, but he or she can join at the end to only one company, right? So if we do that, if we restrict this kind of participation, then other students, there is chances of getting the placements in other companies, right? So it depends upon the task or our intention. Okay, so here similarly, if I say that I want a representation from each, if I say, okay, I'm doing some event, IT students participate, but if I say that I want participation from ITA and B both, then I will be having some samples from section A and some sample from section B. So that becomes my stratified sampling. Suppose if I have ITA, ITB, CCA, CCB, there is some event, and I'm not going for stratified, I'm going for clustering. I want to group, it could be say ITA and CCEB. In that case, ITB or CCA might not represent anywhere, right? So if I want to represent all the four, then I'll be having stratified, that is 4 samples. So at least one, there may be more than one, it depends, but we ensure that at least one should be there. Is this clear now? Any doubts? These 4 methods: simple random sampling with and without replacement, then clustering, and then stratified. Okay, there are no doubts. Let me move forward. So one more method using data cube aggregation. Maybe in the lab you might do, I don't know whether it's included this time or not, because the lab has been reduced to 2 hours. Earlier we had this data cube using your InfoSphere, or you have the next chapter, which is data warehouse. There also you will be learning more about this, what is the meaning of this data cubes. So when we want to represent multiple dimension, so we can have a data of n dimension. So we'll use this representation, what is called as the data cube representation. So if we are having this representation, say for example, here if you look into this, here we have year wise distribution at the cluster. Within each other we have quarters. So for each of the quarters, what is the sales? Okay, we have the sales detail quarterly maintained for each year. So instead of having all this data, I want to get the reduced data. What I can do is I can maintain the year wise data, right? From this it is possible for me to extract the data year wise, 208, 9, 10 and so on. So for year based or yearly, what is the amount of sale? How do I get this number? I can simply add all these 4 quarters. So 2008, there are the sales amount for 4 quarters. If you add them, it is possible for me to get the data for the entire year 2008. So you can see this is a reduced data set what we are having. So that's about the data reduction. That is we are into the chapter data pre-processing, right? So we are going by one the steps, and then the last one is data transformation and data discretization after the data reduction. Okay. So here what we do is we try to transform data in some other form or format. A function that maps the data set values of a given attribute to new set. So why is that? Because maybe we want to ensure some kind of range. Okay. Say suppose if I want to analyze the salary of a company. So say somebody who is doing attender work, the salary may be in terms of some few thousand, say 20,000 or something like that. Suppose if somebody is having a clerical job in that company, their salary would be definitely much more than the attenders. And similarly, the different designations, different kind of salary structures are there. At the end, finally, CEO is the one who is having who is paid highest. Okay. So you can see there is a lot of variation in my data, starting from, say, if I say minimum is 10,000 for a sweeper and the CEO is getting, say, some 2 lakhs or 3 lakhs. In that case, you can say my data is going to vary from 10,000 to around 4 lakhs. Okay. So if I want to normalize this so that all the data lies between, say, for example, 0 to 1, then it is easy for me to visualize or to analyze. So that's the reason we try to transform our data. So what are the various methods that are available for this data transformation? First one is smoothing. So already we have studied this in data cleaning, right? We try to remove the noise by smoothing. So one of the method what we have discussed is binning. Then we said smooth by bin means smooth by bin median, etc. Okay, that is one of the way. The second one is attribute or feature construction. That is the whatever the attributes or features we are having, using that we try to come up with a new feature or the new attribute. That's how we try to transform our data. For example, if I have an attribute called as date of birth and I'm analyzing something based on the age, then as on today's date, it is possible for me to get the age of all the persons because I have the data of the date of birth, right? So I'm getting a new feature called as the age, and I can retain only this new feature age, which I have transformed using the date of birth feature, and I can do some analysis based on the age. Then aggregation, just now I showed you, if you use the data cube representation, it is having summarized data at any level. We can suppose, let us say that if I want to have the details of quarterly, suppose first quarterly what are the sales in each month, then if I can further expand it, I'll be getting the details for Jan, Feb and March, etc. Similarly, if I want to reduce the data, I can combine them as a quarter, or still I want to reduce, maybe I can go in for yearly, etc. Okay, so the data cube, the advantage, either we can go in detail or we can also have the reduced representation. So it is possible for us to transform the data using the given data. So for example, previous slide I showed you that we have the sales information, that is a quarterly. So I'm transforming the same information as a year-based sales, right? I just summed up the data which is already there and I'm able to get the summarized data. That's the aggregation. There are different kinds of aggregation. Maybe you are doing something like, say, group by, for example, right? You are trying to aggregate. Maybe based on some condition, you are trying to get some data. So next one is what is called as normalization. So this is what I was telling you in the beginning. We try to see to it that all our data fits in or falls into some particular given range. So three methods have been shown here: min-max normalization, then z-score normalization, and normalization by decimal scaling. So let us see them in detail, because the smoothing and the attribute aggregation already we have discussed. So let me go through this normalization. So first one is min-max normalization. So we have a data, there is something called as minimum value, there is something called as the maximum value. So I want to transform, I need to give my new range. That's why I call it as the new min and new max. So suffix A represents attribute. It could be any attributes. Whatever the attribute we are considering, that attribute's minimum and maximum value we need to consider. For example, if I say salary, existing minimum value is 4,000 and maximum is say 4 lakhs. And I want it to fall within the range of say 0 to 1. Then what happens? The new minimum for my attribute salary is 0 and the new maximum for my attribute salary is 1, right? So this is the equation. So V is some value which we want to transform. V dash is the new transformed value in place of this V. So if I want to get a new value V dash for this value V for some attribute A, this is what I need to use. V minus minimum A, that is minimum value for that attribute in our data set, divided by the difference between the maximum and the minimum for the same attribute. This is for the existing, and this one is the new one to which we want to transform, the normalize. Okay, new max minus new min plus new min. So this is the standard equation of min max normalization. Suppose it is given that income ranges from $12,000 to $98,000. So sometimes we might give you this information, minimum and maximum. Sometimes we might give simply some set of data. Then you need to find out what is the minimum and what is the maximum. Okay. So in this case, both minimum and maximum have been given. And we want this to be transformed in the range between 0 to 1. So what does it mean now? 12,000 is my min A. 98,000 is my max A. Okay. Then this 0.0 is my new min A and this 1.0 is my new max A. And I want to transform the data, that is $73,600. Fine. So this becomes my V. So I have now my min A, max A, new min A, new max A, and then V. It is easy for me to get this V dash. It's direct substitution. So you can see here, if I substitute this, I'm getting the value as 0.716. Is this clear? It is the value minus min A divided by the difference between the minimum and maximum that are existing in the data multiplied by the difference of new maximum and minimum, and then simply add the new minimum. You'll be getting a transformed value. So using this kind of transformation, what we are doing, we are achieving the normalization. We are trying to normalize our data. That's about the first method, min-max normalization. The second one is Z-score or zero mean normalization. So for this we require the mean and the standard deviation, and this is the equation for Z-score. So V dash, again it's a transformed value. V is the existing value which we want to transform, and mu is the mean of a given data, and the sigma is the standard deviation. Again, for this problem also, sometimes we might give the mean and standard deviation, and we might ask you what is the Z-score. And if you are not giving mean and standard, we are simply giving you some set of data, then you need to find the mean of the data as well as the standard deviation of the data, and then substitute them in this given equation. Suppose if it is given that mu is 54,000 and the standard deviation 16,000, then simply substitute this and you are getting some value as 1.22. So why do we require these multiple methods? Why can't we do only with the first method? Suppose if we suppose if new max and new min is not known to us or not given to us, then we cannot normalize using this min max method, right? In that case, maybe we have the data with us and we don't know what is the new range that is expected, but we want some kind of normalization to be happen, then we can go in for using this second method. So given the data, you should know which method to be used for the purpose of normalization. Okay, so this is the second one. It's the same example I have taken from the textbook. So that's why I told you, useful when the actual minimum maximum are unknown or the new minimum maximum are not known. Or let us say that sometimes you might be having some sample data and you don't know what is the actual minimum maximum, then also you can go for z-score. Or when somebody is not given you the new max and new mean, they simply ask you to normalize, then also you can go for this second method. And of course, when we say min max, we are looking or we are computing the difference between the existing max and mean and also the new max and mean, the difference we are calculating. Again, if we are having some kind of outliers or noise, there may be a problem. So if you suspect that there are outliers in our data, again, the better option is the second method. Okay, the third method is normalization by decimal scaling. So normalize by moving the decimal point of values of attributes A. So the equation is V divided by 10 power j. It is very simple, simplest of all the three. V is the value which you want to normalize or which you want to transform, and simply divide that V by 10 power j. Now what is this j? It is the smallest integer, such that max of that value is always less than 1. So to see what one example to understand it correctly. Suppose if there is an attribute A and it ranges from minus 986 to plus 917. Okay. Then you need to look into what is the maximum absolute value. Okay, you need to consider the minimum and maximum both. Take the absolute and consider. In this case, of course, minus 986 is less than 917, but if you consider the absolute value, then 986 is more than 917, right? So we consider this 986. So how many digits are there in this 986? There are 3 digits. Hence, the value of j becomes 3. So divide all the values by 1000. So if I divide minus 986 by 1000, I'll get minus 0.986. Similarly, 917, if I divide by 1000, I'll be getting 0.917. You can say that's why it's called as decimal scaling. So all the values would be there in decimal values, not as an integer or as the whole numbers. So whenever the requirement is to have the values as decimals, then instead of going for the first two methods, we can use the third one. Okay. So we have three methods for normalization or transforming the data: min-max normalization, z-score normalization, and then the third one is decimal scaling. I repeat, suppose if let us say that instead of minus 986, if I have some value like 96 plus 96 to say 300, then what do we do? Plus 96 to 300. So what is the maximum? Maximum is 300, right? So again 300 is having 3 digits. So again the value of j is 3. Suppose if I have the values which are ranging from say some 530 to say some 60,000. Again greater value 60,000. So how many digits are there in that? That becomes your j. It need not be equal always. Minimum and maximum, it can be anything. Given data, find out the least and the highest value. Consider their, don't consider their signs minus. That's the reason we're telling it is the absolute values. Consider the absolute value. whatever is greatest that we need to consider. So another example could be, say suppose if I have something say minus 9862 97 for example, instead of 970 if I have value from minus 986 to 91, okay, then what happens? Absolute value of minus 986 is 986 and absolute value of 91 is 91. So 91 is having 2 digits and 986 is having 3 digits. 986 is highest. 986 is greater than 91 and hence our J becomes 3. So that we aim to ensure that all the values lies as the or given as the decimal values, always consider the least and the highest value, that is the absolute value. Whichever is greater, consider the number of digits and that is your J. So divide the value V by 10 power J. Okay. So one thing what we need to look into is normalization may change the original data. Definitely, right? So 98 minus 986 has been changed as minus 0.986 and 917 is changed as 0.917, or in earlier cases some salary is changed to point something, isn't it? So of course data is changed because we are transforming, but the original data is not there. We are transforming for some analysis purpose, but we do require our original data also at later point of time for some other purpose. We cannot discard our original data. That's the reason we need to note down what is the method which we are following and what are the parameters that we have used for that method for the purpose of normalization. So if we save the data, next time if we want to get back our original data, then it is possible for us to get our original data. So that is the purpose. So next is data discretization method. So discretize means we are dividing them into different kinds of groups. Okay. So divide the range of a continuous attributes into interval. So there are different methods are there. One of the method is binning. Again, we are looked into this binning. It is a top-down split. It is a unsupervised, right? And again, it could be equal width or equal depth. Then we also analyze the histogram analysis. Then clustering also we have seen. Then I told you the decision tree. There is a separate chapter is there for decision tree in case of classification chapter, and clustering also we are studying in further in detail as a separate chapter. So those what you need to know here is those methods can also be used as the data discretization methods. Then we have one more method called as concept hierarchy formation. So I'll tell you the details of this, how we can use this concept hierarchy for the purpose of discretization. So it reduces the data recursively. Okay. So low level concepts such as the numerical value, say it could be age. So if I have been given the values 1, 5, 10, 9, 8, 20, 60, something like that. So instead of retaining all the values pertaining to age of all the person, I can group it, right? Maybe I can say some say for example 1 to 20 as young, or maybe some 30 to 40 or 45 as middle age, and then 41 to 60 as senior, something like that. Okay, so I'm trying to group the data based on the concept, and I'm arranging them into different levels. So mining and a reduced data set requires fewer inputs. Doing this concept, say for as earlier, suppose let us say if I have a data pertaining to age of 100 people and I'm grouping them into 3 groups, it means I have only now 3 data instead of I'm having the categorical data. 3 categorical data, young, middle aged, and then the senior. I'm not using all the individual 100 data as such. So the data is being reduced. So because the data is reduced, actually it becomes efficient. So efficient means what? Efficient is always with respect to the time. Effective is with respect to the space. You might have studied in algorithm. We say something like effective algorithm or efficient algorithm. So efficient is always with respect to your time complexity, time. So because the data is reduced, the algorithm what we use to analyze also works faster. And ungeneralized data set. Then discretization techniques and the concept hierarchies are applied before data mining as a pre-processing step. Of course, we know that it's one of the last step in the data pre-processing. So individually we can use this step, or they can also be used as one of the steps of pre-processing. So concept hierarchy for the categorical data. Categorical means, you know, they are the discrete data, not the continuous data. Right? It could be geographic location, it could be a job category, it could be some item type. Say for example, if I consider the geographical data, so I'm having something called as the details of the street, then city, and then state, and then country, and so on, right? So these are the different concepts. We are arranging them as a hierarchy. So first comes country. Within a country, there are so many number of states, right? Each state is having so many cities, and each city is having different streets, or maybe we can add further different localities, different areas. Then under different areas we have some different streets and so on. Okay, so this is one of the method called as specification of a partial or total ordering of attributes explicitly at the schema level. Okay, please note the first one, it is done at the when you design your database, your schema, at that level you need to identify what are the concepts and how you can represent it as a hierarchy. Then here another one could be specification of portion of hierarchy, not the complete, it could be a portion of hierarchy. For example, if you specify that state and country form a hierarchy at the schema level. Suppose if I have only two things here, state and the country, then later you can add your own portions or your own concepts into that hierarchy. For example, if I say that the state is Karnataka and different districts, right here, there is no district here. So if I want to add something on my own, I can say, okay, Udupi is a district or Bangalore is a district. They are subsets, sir. They are within the Karnataka, like that. So it is possible for us to specify the portion of the hierarchy by explicit grouping. Then the next one is specification of only a partial set of attributes. So here we are giving the complete attributes or complete hierarchy. Here it is considering or given only the partial. We are saying only street is within the city. It means city contains number of streets. And we are not giving the other concepts or other hierarchy either above city or below the street. Then the fourth and the last one is specification of attributes, but not their partial ordering. Automatically, the ordering or the hierarchy can be generated. For example, I am specifying only the attributes. You can see I have street, I have city, I have state, I have country. I am not giving you any ordering. I am not giving you any hierarchies, but I'm only giving these are my concepts. These are my attributes that I'm having in my data. So by looking into this, by understanding these attributes, it is possible for me to generate the data automatically, right? How I can do? One of the ways is look into the number of values. Let us say if I have been given some data, and if I say there are unique 15 countries are there, okay, and then there are 365 number of states are there, and cities and streets, so on. So I think from these values we know that there are less number of, it means it could be the top one in my hierarchy. So I place the concept of country in the beginning. So within the country we have different states. So then comes the states, and then comes city, and then comes the state. So like this, based on one of the method, of course, it may not be applicable always. It is useful here in this context or with respect to this example. Okay, so like this, given the attributes, you see what is the domain of that attributes, what are the different values that are taken by those attributes, and then decide and come up or generate your concept. That's what is called as automatic concept hierarchy generation, which is something is not given you in the beginning, but you look into, but the attributes are given. Okay, these 4 attributes are given. You look into these attributes, their domain, what is the value that could be stored in each of these attributes, what are the distinct values, analyze something, and based on that try to generate the hierarchy, which consists of various concepts. Okay, and this is the end of our 3rd chapter. Any doubts you can ask me. So if you have now doubts, I advise you to please read the textbook. It is very important to read from the textbook. That's the reason I told you we are not giving the PPT, because we want you to make it a habit to read from the textbook and have a notebook and note down something, whatever is you find relevant or useful, right? The way you used to do in your regular class. Similarly, in online class also, that's the reason I told you maintain a separate notebook. You can just note down. And whenever there are some problems, of course, I'm giving you some time to note down that problem or to solve that problem. So apart from that, read the textbook once. And if you have doubts, maybe you can go back and you can see the recording. Okay, so please read the textbook. If you have any doubt in the 3rd chapter, you may ask me anytime during the next week. Okay, so I want you to study regularly. I may not be available during your tests, assignments, or exam. I don't entertain last moment preparation. I always want my students to study regularly, because I tell in the beginning itself that I'm available to clear the doubts immediately every week, or maybe after the end of every chapter, and not during exam. This has worked out me well. What are the subjects I take, students, they know that they are hesitant to come to me asking for the doubts at the end moment, and they study regularly, and this has helped a lot for the student, and that's the reason I'm continuing with this since many, I'm following this with many years. Okay, so please study regularly. You have a textbook which has been shared with you, you have your recording with you. Okay, so 3rd chapter you can ask me next week, either during your Tuesday that contact hour is there, or maybe before next Saturday. Anyway, you can put me a mail, or maybe Teams, you can message me. I may answer it to the mail or through Teams, or if I think or require, it may not be possible to clarify the doubt using the chat or message or mail, then I may call you over the Teams. We can discuss in Teams. We can have a call, one-to-one call, and I may give you some explanation or example pertaining to whatever is your doubt. Is it fine? Okay, then let me stop here. If you have doubt, you can ask me your doubts, or you may leave the meet